"You're not authorized to lead a rescue, sir." "This is private property," she shrieked, standing knee-deep in water, hair frizzing in the wind, still wearing a sun hat and clutching a clipboard like it was a badge of honor. I stared at her, stunned. Behind me, the van full of elderly evacuees waited, their faces anxious as water lapped at the tires. To my right, the only usable road out of the valley, was blocked with potted plants, a food truck, and a folding table covered in soggy HOA pamphlets. I pressed the mic button on my radio, voice steady but tense. "This is Evac Leader 7, I said, voice cutting through the chaos. "We've got a hostile blockade on the primary flood escape route, requesting immediate clearance." Karen gasped, like I'd just threatened national security. "Hostile? How dare you? I am the president of this HOA," she snapped, voice trembling with outrage. She stood in her soggy sun hat, clutching her clipboard like a shield. I looked at her, then at the floodwaters rushing behind her, at the chaos she was trying to control. With a badge that didn't mean a thing in the middle of a flood, I stared her down. "And I'm the guy trying to keep people alive," I said simply. That's when the war between common sense and HOA stupidity truly ignited. 3 days earlier, everything had seemed calm, deceptively so. I'd just finished my second cup of coffee, the smell of brewing fuel and rain still lingering in the air, when the first flood warning flashed on my phone. No rain yet, just a soft, distant rumble, and a strange, uneasy feeling prickled at my skin. I'd been in disaster zones before, military deployments, crisis management, the kind of situations where every second mattered. But this storm was different. The Weather Channel called it serious, an understatement I knew better. I called it a bomb waiting to go off. The first drops fell late in the afternoon, soft, polite, like the storm was just saying hello. I was outside with my dog Bear, loading sandbags, the rain bouncing off the pavement. Bear, stubborn as always, hated his bright yellow raincoat, but I made him wear it anyway. My property sat just beyond the edge of the neighborhood on slightly higher ground, just past where the county road turned private. That road was the only escape route, narrow, vital, and now a fragile lifeline. I drove up the private road to check the barricades. 2 massive concrete planters blocked the way, their heavy weight a feeble attempt to keep out looters, as Karen proclaimed during a meeting 2 weeks ago. Beside them, Derek, Karen's son, grinned behind the wheel of his pizza truck, decked out like a failed DJ, tank top, sunglasses indoors, the whole party vibe. He waved at me, a cocky smile on his face. "We're doing exclusive pizza tonight," he said, voice full of bravado. "HO members only." "You're blocking the evacuation route," I replied, voice flat. "You're risking lives." "Nah," he said, gesturing proudly. "Mom says only trusted residents can pass. Better safe than sorry." Before I could argue, Karen appeared like a storm herself, perfume, indignation, and a clipboard in hand. She marched up, eyes blazing. "Jace, you can't just go around acting like you're in charge. This is a peaceful, controlled environment, and your paranoia is disturbing the neighborhood." I took a breath, knowing I was about to get into a fight I couldn't win. "There's a Category 4 storm barreling toward us," I said, voice calm, but firm. "The creeks have already passed their banks. We need to move this now." She scoffed. "It's just rain. We've seen worse. This isn't a war zone. It's a community, and I've decided we're sheltering in place." Sheltering in place? With water rising like a beast hungry for the town? I clenched my fists. "Floodwaters don't check HOA IDs," I said quietly. "You're putting everyone at risk," she shot back. "You always did like to play soldier." With a sneer. "Well, this isn't a battlefield. It's a neighborhood, and I'm the guardian of its aesthetic. You're endangering us all with your doomsday plans." I turned away, radioed county emergency services, and left before I said something I'd regret. The response was already chaos. 2 main county roads had collapsed into marshland, and detours were failing one after another. When they realized our little community had the last accessible elevated route, they begged for my help. I didn't hesitate. I'd done this before in worse places with worse odds. The problem? This time my enemy wasn't just nature. It was ignorance, stubbornness, and a woman with a whistle who refused to listen. Over the next 12 hours, I transformed my property into a command post. My garage became a supply depot, food, water, medical supplies, all organized, ready. I used my ham radio license to tap into emergency channels, coordinating with a convoy forming at the county line. Neighbors, some I barely knew, started arriving, elderly, scared, desperate. I passed out blankets, bottled water, and tried to answer their questions. Every single one asked the same thing: why won't Karen let us leave? I didn't have a good answer. Only that time was running out. Dawn was less than 4 hours away from the creek swallowing the last exit. I knew the floodwaters weren't just creeping, they were marching, furious and relentless, eating up the edges of the road like a predator. The water was now halfway up Derek's pizza truck, the planters and tiki torches submerged, the muddy ground trembling under the onslaught. That's when I saw Karen's latest stunt. She'd redecorated her blockade overnight. Deck chairs, folding tables, trash bins, potted plants all lashed together with bungee cords and twine. A sign hung crookedly proclaiming no trespassing, but it was half soggy and illegible. Derek, still live streaming, narrated her heroic stand like he was reporting from the front lines of a war. She was shouting through her megaphone, a bright yellow poncho wrapped around her, trying to rally her troops. "Residents only," she yelled. "This is private land. No one's leaving today." I approached, calmly, but with force. "Karen, you're blocking an active emergency egress route. This is a life-or-death situation." Her eyes widened. "You're not authorized to do this," she shrieked, voice cracking. "I am," I said, pulling out the governor's emergency order, an official document that gave me authority to override her petty barricades. I handed it to her. She snatched at it, eyes scanning, then glared. "Fake. You forged this." "Look at the signature," I said. "It's real." She hesitated, then lunged for my radio. Missed. Waterlogged and slipping. She stumbled into the mud, shrieking like a banshee. Derek tried to help her but slipped too, splattering mud and pond water everywhere. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Then, from somewhere deeper in the neighborhood, a faint cheer rose. It was the sound of hope, of people finally seeing through her delusions. Suddenly, a sheriff cruiser splashed into view, sirens blaring. More rescue vehicles. Karen's face twisted with panic. She waved her arms, shouting, "Arrest him! He's impersonating a government official." The deputy stepped out, calm and steady. "Ma'am, did you build this obstruction?" he asked, gesturing to her barricade. She faltered. "It's for community safety." "Ma'am," he said patiently, "you're actively blocking emergency services. This is your final warning. Remove the blockade now or face detention." Her mouth moved, but no words came out. She was staring in disbelief as the two rescue workers began dismantling her mock barricade, pulling chairs, tables, and signs into the trucks. The water kept rising. The last families hurried into the convoy, some helping neighbors, others just grabbing what they could. I watched their faces, relief, exhaustion, gratitude. Bear barked once, proud and alert. Reggie, the old man in a wheelchair, shook my hand so hard I thought he might break it. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said, eyes shining. "You stood up to her. You saved us all." Karen stayed behind, soaked, silent, defeated. She watched as her barricades and illusions crumbled before the law, before the floodwaters, before the truth. She had tried to hold her little kingdom together with rules, with fear, with stubborn pride. But water and law had washed her away. By the time the last truck pulled out, the neighborhood was finally free. The storm's fury had eased. The water receded, revealing a landscape scarred but resilient. People who had once only nodded politely now shared stories, laughter, and plans for rebuilding. The blockade was gone. The HOA was dissolving. Karen's reign of petty control was over, drowned beneath the flood and the truth. As I watched the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues, I knew the storm had finally passed. Not just the flood, but the chaos she'd tried to unleash. The neighborhood was healing, stronger than ever, stitched together by shared struggle and survival, And in that quiet, powerful moment, I understood. The real strength wasn't in rules or titles, but in community. People standing together when everything else falls apart. That was the true victory, and it was unforgettable. The convoy rolled, past Karen's crumbling barricade, the last of the trucks splashing through the muddy water, hearts pounding with the rush of relief and adrenaline. Karen's face twisted into a mixture of shock and fury as she watched us go, soaked and victorious. She screamed something unintelligible, fists pounding the air, but her voice was drowned out by the roaring floodwaters and the distant sirens that signaled rescue had finally arrived. Real rescue, not her petty makeshift blockade. Once we cleared the road, I turned my attention to the neighborhood. Families were hurriedly climbing into trucks, their faces a blend of exhaustion, fear, and hope. Elderly residents clung to their loved ones, some with tears in their eyes. The little kids, clutching stuffed animals and blankets, looked around confused but safe for the first time in days. I saw neighbors helping each other, passing blankets, lifting the weak into trucks, sharing bottled water. That moment, their relief, hit me harder than the flood itself. But I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Karen hadn't just lost her barricade. She had lost her control. Her eyes darted from the chaos to her ruined signs, her mouth working silently as if trying to summon words that wouldn't come. Her figure, soaked and defeated, stood alone in the mud. Her empire of rules, her reign of petty tyranny, was crumbling, faster than her fake barricades. It was only a matter of time before her last attempts to claw her way back started. Silent threats, legal threats, fake fines. I moved closer to the flooded roadblock, my boots sinking into the muddy ground. From the corner of my eye, I saw her reach into her pocket, pulling out her phone, probably to call someone to spin her next lie. I didn't give her the chance. I pulled out my own phone and started recording her, just in case. The storm was easing, but the storm she was brewing inside her head was only just beginning to show cracks. Derek, still live streaming, was narrating her futile stand like a hero in a bad movie. "She's fighting for the community," he proclaimed, voice full of false bravado. But everyone watching knew better. They saw her desperation, her frantic gestures as she tried to rally her imaginary troops. The water rose behind her, now lapping at her ankles, unperturbed by her bluster. The flood had no respect for her rules or her ego. Suddenly, a new siren blared from the distance. The police. The real ones. Not her make-believe patrol, but officers who understood the seriousness of the situation. Their lights flashed brighter, cutting through the gray sky. The sheriff's cruiser splashed into view, slowing as it approached her, the officers stepping out with calm efficiency. One of them, a tall man with steady eyes, looked directly at Karen and then at the wreckage she'd built. "Ma'am," he said softly but firmly, "this barricade is an obstruction to emergency services. You're interfering with a rescue operation. You have two options: clear the road or we'll do it for you." Her face drained of color. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. Her hands trembled as she looked at her pathetic barricade. Half, fallen, waterlogged signs, broken furniture, and her pride shattered along with it. The officers moved swiftly, dismantling the junk she'd stacked to hold back the flood of reality. As the last of her makeshift blockade was pulled away, I saw her shoulders slump, defeated, broken, and finally realizing she'd lost control. The crowd now gathered around the trucks erupted into quiet applause, some clapping softly, others just nodding in relief. The elderly, the children, the parents, all of them knew they'd averted a disaster they'd almost been powerless to stop. I watched a woman hand out dry socks and bottled water, a young couple help an elderly neighbor into a truck, all of them working together, no longer under the shadow of her petty rules. I looked over at Bear, my loyal dog, who was standing proudly near the truck bed, tail wagging like he'd saved everyone. Reggie, the old man in the wheelchair, shook my hand so hard I thought he'd hurt himself. "Never thought I'd see the day," he murmured, eyes shining. "You did good, kid. You really did." Karen stood alone in the mud, soaked and silent, her eyes fixed on the retreating convoy. Her victory, the illusion of control, was gone. Her signs, her barricades, her threats, They were all just paper and plastic now, useless against the flood and the law. She had tried to rule with fear, with petty rules, with threats, but she had drowned in her own pride. We moved on, helping the last families into safe places, clearing the way for the rescue teams. The waters still threatened, but the worst was over. The neighborhood, battered and muddy, was finally beginning to breathe again. People started sharing stories, helping each other clean up, rebuilding what was lost. The air was thick with relief, resilience, and the faint hope that this was the end of her reign of foolishness. As I stood watching them, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about surviving the flood. It was about fighting back against the tyranny of petty rules and stubborn ignorance. It was about community, about people coming together when it mattered most. Karen had tried to trap us with rules, with fear, with her own delusions of control. But in the end, the flood and law had washed her away, leaving us stronger than ever. And as the last truck disappeared into the distance, I looked up at the clearing sky. The storm had finally passed. The water was receding. But the real victory was already here, people united, resilient, ready to rebuild. And I knew deep down that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one written not by fear or rules, but by the strength of a community that refused to drown in petty tyranny. The convoy rolled out of the neighborhood, the last vehicle splashing through the muddy, waterlogged streets as the storm finally eased. Karen's ruined barricade was left behind. Planks, chairs, signs, all sinking into the rising water that still hovered menacingly close. Her face, soaked and twisted with rage and helplessness, watched us go. She shrieked something, a frantic scream lost in the roar of retreating floodwaters, but no one turned back. The law had spoken, and the flood had spoken even louder. As the trucks disappeared down the main road, I paused for a heartbeat, looking back at the wreckage of her so-called fortress. The water lapped at her feet, and her eyes flicked desperately over the chaos she'd created, trying to hold on to her last scraps of control. But the tide of reality was relentless. It had already overtaken her authority, her rules, her pride. The neighborhood was free. Finally. The chaos was giving way to quiet, the kind of quiet that settles after a storm when everyone knows they survived the worst. I moved toward the small crowd gathered around the trucks, relief washing over me like a tide. The elderly, children, parents, all of them safe. The smiles, the tears, the hugs, they were the proof that we'd won. Not with fists or threats, but with truth, law, and community. I saw a woman handing out dry socks, a young man helping an elderly neighbor into a truck. Simple acts that spoke volumes more than any rule or decree ever could. But I knew the true battle was far from over. Karen was a stubborn storm, and storms don't just vanish overnight. Her eyes, still burning with fury, stared at the retreating convoy, silent now, but brewing a storm of her own behind that soaked, defeated face. I kept my distance, watching, her knowing that her pride and obsession wouldn't die easily. She'd come back, probably with lawyers, lawsuits, or worse, more lies. Then I saw her reach into her pocket, her hand trembling, pulling out her phone, probably to dial someone, to threaten, to lie. I didn't wait. I pulled out my own phone and started recording her, just in case. The water surged around her, rising higher, but she didn't notice. Her focus was on the last remnants of her battered empire. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed across the neighborhood. The distant wail of sirens. Rescue had arrived. Real rescue. The sheriff's cruiser and emergency truck splashed into view, lights flashing. Officers jumped out with calm, serious expressions, moving swiftly to assess the chaos she'd left behind. The tall officer approached her, his voice soft yet firm. "Ma'am, this barricade is an obstruction to emergency services. You're interfering with a rescue operation. You have two choices. Remove this now or we'll do it for you." Her face drained of all color. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her eyes darted between the wreckage she'd built and the law now standing before her. Her hands trembled as she looked at the water rising behind her, at the chaos she'd tried to control. The officers moved in, dismantling her precious barricade, dragging away the soggy signs, the broken furniture, the plastic plants, everything that symbolized her futile attempt to dominate a natural disaster. She stood frozen, soaked to the bone, shoulders slumped, defeated. Her eyes flicked to her phone, then to the law enforcement officers. Her last shred of arrogance crumbled. The crowd, silent until now, erupted into a wave of applause, soft at first, then louder. People cheered, tears of relief streaming down their faces. They knew they'd been saved not just by law but by truth and unity. In the midst of the chaos, I saw Bear, my dog, standing proud and alert, tail wagging like he'd just won a battle. Reggie, the old man in the wheelchair, shook my hand so hard I thought he'd hurt himself. "Never thought I'd see this," he said, eyes shining. "You did good, son, you really did." Karen, soaked and silent, remained in the mud, her eyes fixed on the retreating trucks. Her empire of petty rules had dissolved. Her signs, her barricades, her threats, they were nothing now, just debris sinking into the floodwaters. Her pride was broken, her illusion shattered.